I'm joined now by Dr. Ola Brown, who is the general partner of HealthCap, an investment firm that focuses on early stage investment in the health tech and fintech industries, as well as infrastructure investment. She holds a bachelor's degree in medicine, a master's in finance and economic policy, and is currently completing her PhD in finance with a focus on digital currencies and monetary policy. She's published 5 books, and her latest book is called Journey to Series A. The book focuses on financial technology for companies. Great to have you on the show with us today, Dr. Ola. You're doing so much academically on your road to a PhD, so you're going to become Dr. Ola.
So, yes.
Medical and Doctor of Philosophy. Anyway, thanks for coming on. Thanks.
Nice to see you.
So the first story that we're covering is the Fitch downgrade of the US. I think for those who don't really follow the American economy, it's the kind of thing you hear about frontier markets and emerging markets, not an advanced economy. So what's the story behind this?
You know, I think that Fitch came under a lot of scrutiny, as well as all the ratings agencies during the 2008 financial crisis, when banks were literally like on the verge of failure, and you know the ratings agencies were still giving them AAA ratings. And I think that at that point, people were saying that perhaps the American banking system and the ratings agencies had gotten a bit too chummy, and they couldn't be objective about rating American banks, because if you remember, Lehman, all of those banks were, you know, doing very well in terms of their ratings, and they weren't very objective in terms of spotting all those toxic assets that caused the banking crisis of 2008. So I think the ratings agencies have undergone some reforms, and they're trying to make sure that their objectivity is intact. That said, I was discussing it this morning actually, and I said there's a lot of real problems. A real problem.
What are the real problems?
I mean, there's a lot of real problems in the world.
Okay.
You know, there's this situation with Niger. There's, you know, our subsidy in Nigeria. You know, even there's there's real problems. The creditworthiness of the most prosperous country in the world is not really a real markets problem.
Yeah.
In terms of the fact that people still, despite what the rating agencies say, people still see sort of American Treasuries as a gold standard.
Yeah,
so
as a flight to safety.
I was watching this Warren Buffett quote. They asked him for a quote on it, and he said that he bought 10 billion of US Treasuries last week. He's buying 10 billion of Treasuries this week, and the only question he's asking himself next week is whether to buy 10 billion of the 30 days or 10 billion of the 90 days.
So most investors, savvy investors, are basically ignoring this. It's not really relevant. So why is Janet Yellen making such a song and dance of it if it has no real implications?
I think the first time something happens to you, even if it was like vaguely the right thing to do, because that would be the way that they would treat other countries, right?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of politicization of the debt ceiling, for instance, and it brings some instability. And I think if Fitch didn't do that, then there'd be questions about their objectivity.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, right, markets lead the ratings agencies. The ratings agencies are not market makers. So I applied for a facility from a Nigerian bank a few weeks ago, about the time of this downgrade. And we hold US Treasury bills, and we hold a few African Treasury bills as well. But when it came to the collateral, guess which one that the bank asked for? They asked for the US one, because the US is still seen as the gold standard. And I'm not sure that the ratings agencies will necessarily change that. But I think that reputationally for the ratings agencies, they need to show objectivity. And if there was this drama around the debt ceiling and, you know, excess debt, and every year it comes to this like sort of impasse in the political situation, and they've not really done anything about that. So it keeps on coming up every year. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of mixed signals to markets. I think that it was, the right thing to do for them, but has it really affected the way people perceive?
No, not really.
Perceive the US Treasuries and the reliability and the idea of the creditworthiness of America? Definitely not.
Of course, in my mind, I liken it to getting an A instead of an A star. So really, anyway, let's move on to the bigger things you mentioned.
Absolutely.
So Oxford Economics talks about the fact that politics is a threat to global. I mean, this sounds like something we've known for a long time. I used to be a political risk analyst, and this is what we used to advise investors. So what is it about this finding that's particularly relevant at this point in time?
So I think that over time, we've had a relatively kind of peaceful, since 2008, we've had a relatively kind of peaceful global economic system. And I think the impact of geopolitical risk came as a shock when the Russia-Ukraine
crisis,
situation
yes,
came on board. So I think this is just a good reminder that because in between sort of 2019, 2018, we started seeing private sector people as sort of the heroes and the masters of the universe. And, it's only their decisions that matter. But at the end of the day, as influential as Tony Elumelu is, he cannot wake up and declare war.
Right.
So politicians still have a huge amount of influence over business. And I think that we'd forgotten that. And I think that the article just draws our attention back to the fact that some of the most important and also unpredictable risks are political in nature. The fact is that if you're following a company on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, for instance, you'll know from their quarterly reports how the end of the year is going to look, and probably be able to make a reasonably intelligent prediction about how the next few years are going to go. Politicians are not predictable. And that's why geopolitical risks are such a big factor, because number one, they're sudden, they're unpredictable, and they have
Huge impact.
Yeah.
And of course, we know about this black swan events, highly unlikely, but if they do happen,
Absolutely.
Huge impact. And it's interesting, it says around 36% of businesses polled view geopolitical tensions as a top risk. I actually think that's quite low, given how business and politics are quite closely intertwined. Very interesting story there. The next story we're going to look at is this story around, I believe it was Walmart paying $1.4 billion to buy Flipkart, which is an Indian company, and of course the valuations of that company going out. Is this part of just an expansionist move or consolidating its market share in the US?
I think it's quite interesting from a number of perspectives, but I'll talk about the perspective that I find it most interesting. I think that big American companies and big European companies are now realizing that their demographics looking forward, don't necessarily support the kind of growth that they want their companies to see. And the same with Japan. I mean, in Japan, there are more adult diapers sold than children's diapers. However,
it has such an aging population.
Yes, absolutely. But in emerging and frontier markets, we have these really fast-growing populations. We have young growing populations. In some parts of Europe, the average age is like 50. In Africa, the average age is 19. So we're seeing what I believe is going to be a continuing trend of large Western conglomerates and, Japanese and South Korean conglomerates looking for this growth and thinking, where can we find this growth? And it's in countries like, it's in African countries, it's in Asian countries with these young, fast-growing populations, rapidly urbanizing populations, and growing consumer classes. So I was really happy about that transaction because Walmart buying and paying such a good price for Flipkart, which is an Indian e-commerce firm, tells me that I should be expecting the same kind of transactions in the next few years in Nigerian companies, in Egyptian companies, in Kenyan companies, as these big conglomerates continue to search for that fast growth.
Yeah, and in that search for that fast growth, I mean, a related issue is that when they then come into these new markets, there are issues around the business environment. We just saw the announcement by GSK that is kind of scaling down its Africa operations, which some people are sort of saying is actually an exit. So it's a bit of touch and go there, isn't it?
Well, I think that entering a country via acquisition, like Walmart are doing, is very different from entering a country as your own brand.
Okay.
So Flipchart have already they're a local company, they have local systems and processes, they have local people, they have local knowledge.
So they've scaled a lot of the hurdles already.
Absolutely, yeah. So they've scaled a lot of the hurdles, whereas when you're coming in with your sort of Western systems and processes into environment that has these institutional voids and these unique things or unique challenges that you wouldn't find in your home country, then it's quite difficult. And I think that's why I'm saying that the acquisition strategy is probably what we'll be seeing, where they'll be buying existing assets that have been proven in the market, buying existing brands that are strong in the market, as opposed to coming in with their own brands and then trying to establish those. Sometimes it can be quite difficult.
Yeah. So final story on Nigeria. I always say we save the best for last. 40% of small businesses are owned by women. I just kind of feel like this is news we've always known. Is the NBS just repackaging it and telling us what we've already known? Because on the other hand, these women businesses don't really do well in getting funding. So tell us a story about just the sheer number of women businesses out there making a difference.
So I actually found this story fascinating, and I like when these statistics come out because I don't think that people really internalize what that means. If 40% of small businesses in Nigeria are owned by women, then that positions women as absolutely essential for creating jobs, for economic growth, and for lifting people out of poverty. Small businesses make up they provide the most jobs in any economy, not the big businesses. So I'm excited to see those statistics, and I also think that from a policy perspective, it's useful to keep on putting those numbers out, because when you look at the number of businesses owned compared to the funding gotten, then you see
there's a huge gap.
And I think that it's important increasingly for policymakers to see investing in women as not just something that they do for women's empowerment, but something that they do because they want to create jobs and because they want to grow the economy as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. And some people argue that a lot of those may be skewed towards maybe businesses that are more towards the informal sector. But actually, we're seeing a lot of women in more formal sector enterprises who are scaling and growing businesses. What are your thoughts?
Whether informal or formal, I think informal businesses just means that you're not registered and you're not paying tax. So what can we encourage those businesses to do? To formalize.
Yes.
Because when they formalize, they can access financing better. When they formalize, they probably employ more people. When they formalize, they'll be contributing directly to government revenue. So it's about creating incentives for these companies to actually become formal and making it an advantage rather than an inconvenience. Because the people that don't formalize, it's not as if they don't have sense. They know why they're not formalizing, because usually sometimes it can be more of a cost and inconvenience than, the incentives there to formalize. So we've got to make sure that the right incentives are in place, the education is in place as well, to make sure that these companies formalize and then scale.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ola Brown.